By the end of the 1930s, Russian designers were experimenting with a number of heavy tank designs. The experience of Soviet tanks in the Spanish Civil War had clearly demonstrated the weakness of their armour against German 37mm anti-tank guns. So in 1937, the Directorate of Armed Forces issued a new specification. Further heavy tanks would have to be sufficiently armoured to withstand fire from a 76.2mm gun and be powered by a diesel engine. Several models were produced, one of which was the KV. The KV was named after Klimenty Voroshilov, the Soviet People's Commissar for Defense. It had a 5-man crew. It mounted a 76.2mm gun with 3 7.62mm machine guns. Its armour was up to 106mm thick. The KV was powered by a V2 diesel engine capable of 500 brake horsepower, a range of 225 kilometers and a top road speed of 35 kilometers per hour.
The tank was 46 tons, quite heavy, and one of the drawbacks already was at the time that it couldn't keep up with the T-34s, and that was a setback to it. It had, however, quite a few advanced things incorporated, like the torsion bar suspension, and also had a compressed air starter. But in general, it was a bit long for its design, and the steering was rather primitive and gave often trouble. That was its weakest link, really, the steering system.
Despite its low speed, the KV-1 used its workhorse V2 diesel engine to great effect.
The V2 was an excellent engine. It was simple, it was easy to maintain, and it had the great benefit of being diesel, which meant that it was much easier to start in the cold Russian winters. Less problems with ignition, less problems with damp. But when you think about it, that engine didn't really change very much. Right up until the late 60s, the Russians were still using essentially that same engine on all their tanks.
By the late 1930s, Stalin had become increasingly worried that Russia would be invaded from the West. This fear was intensified by the fact that Leningrad, with its population of 3.5 million, was just 32 kilometers from the Finnish border. Stalin approached the Finnish government with requests, including one to build a naval base, all of which were refused. So in November 1939, he ordered the invasion of Finland. On paper, the Red Army had an enormous advantage, outnumbering the small Finnish force by more than 5 to 1. It was backed up by over 1,500 tanks, a number of which were KVs. Yet the campaign turned into a complete disaster for Russia.
The war in Finland is a rather strange war because it isn't really suited for the kind of independent operations which deep battle takes into account. It's much more like the First World War than anything that will come later on. And in particular, there's a problem of getting through the Mannerheim line, which is the line of Finnish field fortifications between Leningrad and Finland. It's very hard to break through those lines. They've got mines, they've got anti-tank guns, they've got concrete pillboxes, and so on. And so, in a way, the KV is suited for that more than it is suited for operations in the open steppes of Ukraine or even in Belarus, because it's a relatively slow tank, but a very heavily armored one.